Well, good morning or good day to you at home. Thanks for joining us on this vlog. Pastor Robby here with you. And I have the pleasure of sitting next to Jim Capps, our short-term interim pastor, who has been with us now about a week. And it's been a pleasure to connect with him and get to know him. And I figured it would be great to have Jim with us and get to know him more. He's been a part of this church 25 some odd years ago. He was here at this church, but obviously a lot of things have changed. And
Sure.
Jim, I didn't know if I want people to hear about what an interim does, but I also want for the folks who don't know you to hear a little bit about you. And so
Okay.
you used to be a pastor here. Walk us through kind of where your path has taken you since then.
Well, before I was here, I was in Belleville, Illinois, and made the 50-minute trip across the river, and then was here from 1983 through 1995.
Yeah.
And then felt called by God, not because this church was bad or anything like that, but because I just felt a deep sense of God's call to go to the place where I started, which was in Indianapolis. And so I went to the Southport Presbyterian Church, and I was there from 1995 through 2008.
Great.
And then not wanting to coast into retirement, I felt called to something else, to do something else. And one of those things I thought about was go to First Presbyterian Church in Pittsburgh, but that didn't work out because the last minute, my wife's mother, and my wife is an only child, Alice is an only child, had a severe reversal in her health so that she couldn't move. And so we ended up doing interims after that. And that was, we've done 5 of them.
Did 5 interims. So you're a pastor here, a pastor in Indianapolis, and
Right.
And then you've been an interim for 5 different churches, varying
Right.
sizes, varying different experiences. It's been fun for me to hear in different contexts, just sort of what your experiences have been with different churches in the interim process, and you've told different groups kind of what your approach is to interim work, and I wondered if you could just kind of share that with the folks so that they kind of understand what your approach is, and obviously it's a shorter period of time, but I think it's still so helpful for people to hear what an interim does.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Well, I was in San Antonio, I was in Zionsville, Indiana, then my granddaughter was born, so and that's my daughter's a pastor in Florida, in Orlando, so I went to Florida. It's funny how that worked out, and then to Austin, Texas, and then right across the river from Philadelphia. And a common thing, and Robby, I don't know if you've seen this a little bit in these last few days, but one of the things when a new pastor comes, both the staff as well as the congregation many times looks like a deer in headlights. I think I mentioned that last week, and you don't know what to expect, and it's kind of scary, and it's a new person with different style and all that, and so that's kind of where it all starts. And so to me, the most important thing at the beginning is to try to build relationships with people. And so in San Antonio, which was a large church, I met with 600 people in the first 6 months, and that was over meals, it was over coffee, it was in all kinds of settings, mostly social settings, and on people's turf and not necessarily at the church. And that, I think, was tremendously helpful. Then we knew each other, and we knew what to expect. And then if changes needed to be made, they realized that it wasn't going to be someone who was going to force something on them. It was something that they were going to collaboratively work on and really seek God's face on what should happen and what didn't need to happen.
Right. And I think that just in watching you here for a few weeks and knowing what I know about pastoral care and pastoral ministry, that task of letting people be heard and hearing people and connecting with them in that way seems so valuable at any transition point and really in any ministry period. That gift of being pastorally sensitive and hearing people and connecting is so valuable. And so I felt that on staff. I think he's been meeting with tons of folks. He's been with staff. He's met with elders. He's met with Zoom groups. So and he can. I'll just say this for you that if you want to connect with him, he's interested.
I'd love to do that. I'd love to do that. And I'm reminded as you even say that, Robby, with this was dozens of years ago, long before your time, when I was about your age.
Yeah.
There was a book out that was really important, and it was called The Awesome Power of the Listening Ear.
Yeah.
And I think listening, saying nothing, but hearing other people is crucial. And
Right.
so to me, that's the beginning of the work for an interim.
Right.
But then once you begin to hear where they are, and every church is different.
Right.
You can't put churches in a box and say, here's a process we're going to do, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, exactly like this every time. But you have to meet them where they are, much like Jesus met people like where they were. Right. And then you begin to see some things that maybe together they need to work on if they're going to prepare the way. And I love John the Baptist. I'm going to be preaching on John the Baptist this week, and he prepared the way for the Lord. And I think if we're going to prepare the way, not only for the next person, but for what the Lord wants to do, what Jesus wants to do in the lives of the church, right. Then, there's some things that sometimes need to happen.
Right.
And so that you begin to hear. I mean, in some cases it has to do with budgets.
Right.
Some cases it has to do with staff. Some cases it has to do with programs, sometimes healing, sometimes reconciliation, all kinds of factors, and you never know for sure what it is. On the outside, maybe when you interview with the church, it's one thing, right. But once you get on the inside and really hear people, right. Then it may be quite another thing.
Right, and you've talked a little bit about, I've heard story. It's the fact that you've had 5 interims. I think is such a gift, and also obviously experience as a senior pastor at large churches, Bonham being one of them. There's just so many dynamics that come to play, and you've talked about, like you said, budget issues or staff issues and all those things. What are some of the things that you hope an interim can do for that transition period for, say, a new senior pastor as they come in? And you've kind of
right.
alluded to that some already, but
yes. Well, I think the key is trying to, at least the way I always looked at it is, what would I want as a senior pastor to have done before I arrive, so that I'm not burning capital, as it were,
right.
at the very beginning. And I might cite an example. I knew a pastor in suburban Chicago who moved to the Mecca of all Meccas, the place where the University of Michigan presides, Ann Arbor, and who would want to go to any place better than that? But during the you don't seem to agree with me, but during the interim time, they didn't deal with issues that needed to be dealt with, and there were some pretty heavy ones, and he never told me what they were, but he said after 2 years of really dealing with the tough stuff, as soon as he arrived, that a church from Florida called, and he would normally say, and they were interested in him as pastor, and he would say usually, I'm sorry, I'm in a great setting here, and I just got here. But he said, I'm sure I'm not interested, but we could talk. And so what happened is 6 months later, after talking, right. he went to the other church in Florida. And so I think it's pay me now or pay me later in some cases, and if there are things that we can do during an interim period that make it better and healthier, not only for the congregation, but for that new pastor to come in, right. then we need to do it. The other thing is, if someone needs to take an arrow in the back, it may be better for the interim, because the interim's not going to be there for the long run,
right.
rather than the next pastor coming in. Yeah. And so
it's like laying that groundwork.
That's a better way to
right.
put it. Laying that groundwork. I don't like the arrow in the back image either very much.
Yeah.
But no, and sometimes again it means evaluating the staff,
right.
and really also helping the staff if there are fears, if there is pain in any way from past in any way, to hopefully find a new sense of joy. And usually it's kind of, I can't help it, but it's usually through humor, through meeting with people again, building relationships and sometimes you give some of them new confidence to go on, and so it's that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think, that's helpful to hear, all those different tasks that have to happen in an interim process for the sake of the next stage of ministry the church is doing, because I grew up in Presbyterian churches, and the task of an interim always seems so long, 18 to 20 months, a long
Sure.
time of an interim coming through. I always thought, well, let's just hire somebody and get it going. But I guess what I'm hearing from you say that for the sake of the long-term health of the church and trajectory, it's really a useful and healthy time for an interim.
I think that's true, and I don't think there could be any prescribed church. There may be some churches, a prescribed way of doing it, but
Right.
some churches may only need a year or less, and if they
Right.
could find a person, that might be good, and sometimes interims can go too long, I'll be honest
Sure.
with you. But other times, they really need that time to kind of upright themselves, right, and then to set a direction. And I think a crucial piece of it in my mind is, rather than looking for a person who's going to bring a vision, make sure that you are together on a vision and some momentum, some direction you're going,
Yeah.
so that the new person comes and is a part of that. And so you look for a person not to bring the vision, but to implement the vision and the direction you find yourselves already going.
Right.
And that just coincides so much with my idea of ministry, is that it's a side-by-side thing, and it's not the pastor way up on the top making all the calls
Yeah,
and doing everything and telling you where you're going to go, but it's together with the leading of the Spirit. And I believe that, for example, that God directs you as a member of the team,
Right.
every bit as much as me, let's say, as the quote-unquote leader of the team.
Sure.
And so we need to work together. That's the way God works.
Right. Yeah, that's beautiful. Well, hopefully for you guys at home and for anybody listening to this, that you got a little sense of both Jim's spirit but also his desire to in this interim process to help us and what that might look like for a church moving forward. And I'll just say from my side, it's been a real pleasure, even in a week and a half, to be able to connect with Jim and experience his calming presence, but also his depth of wisdom and insight into important decisions as we look forward as a church. So, Jim, I'm really glad that you're on board.
Well, and I'm glad to be working alongside you, Robby. I like to watch him blush. I don't know if you're going to pick this up on the camera, but he's blushing a little bit right now. But I think this guy's got a lot of potential, and Bonham is very fortunate that Robby's on this team.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks, Jim. Well, like I said, glad you guys tuned in. Glad we could have Jim. We'll probably do more of these things. You'll get to know Jim more, and we'll be glad to talk together and to have a video like this in your home or on your computer, however you connect with us. So thanks for the time. Thank you, Jim.
You're welcome.
And
Thank you.
We'll see you next time. Thanks.